Alright, in this lesson, we are going to talk about how to add and subtract polynomial expressions. So up to this point, we have simplified polynomial expressions, rational polynomial expressions, and we have multiplied and divided. So now we're going to add and subtract. And your essential question, your focus is what is needed to add and subtract a polynomial expression, a rational one. So these two problems are the kind of problems that you can kind of check yourself and see if you're understanding at the end of this lesson. Alright, so let's go back to 4th grade. I have 4/9 and I'm subtracting 1/2. What do you remember? So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure this out. Alright, so if you remember, in order to add or subtract fractions, I need a common denominator. So when I think about 9 and 2, the smallest number that they both have in common that they can both go into is 18. So I need to make 9 look like 18 and I need to make 2 look like 18. So I know that 9 times 2 is 18, but in order to keep this fraction equivalent, what I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. So this is like multiplying 2 over 2 is 1. So it's like multiplying by 1, which won't change the value of the fraction. And if you look, 8 over 18 can reduce to 4 over 9. And the same over here. To make 2 look like 18, I need to multiply by 9. And what I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. So then I end up with 8/18 minus 9/18, which they have a common denominator, so now I just subtract and I get -1/18. So that's just a refresher of how we add and subtract fractions, because when we add in those rational expressions, those polynomials, it's not going to be any different. So these are the guiding questions that I use. If you get stuck, these may help you. I'm not going to read through them right now. You can have them pause the video and put them in your notes, but I am going to be referencing them as I solve problems. Alright, so in example 1, I have 3m over 2m plus 8 plus m minus 2 over 2m. So in order to add or subtract these, I would need a common denominator. And right now, I have 2m plus 8 and I have 2m. So they're not a common denominator. I can't just put plus 8 on the end because that would change the value of this fraction. The only way I can change things is by multiplying or dividing. So the first question I'm going to ask myself is, can I factor any of the denominators? Well, this denominator is a monomial, so that's as simple as it goes. But when I look at 2m plus 8, I can factor that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can pause the video and factor that. So I was able to take out a 2, and I end up with m plus 4. 2 times m plus 4 is my factored denominator. So then my next question is, what would my common denominator be? So I'm going to look at what do they share already. So when I look at them, they both have a 2. So they already have a 2 in common. So whatever is left is going to be the common denominator. So I see that this one has a 2 and an m plus 4, and this has a 2 and an m. So over here, this one's missing the m plus 4, and over here, this one's missing the m. So my common denominator is going to be the combination of those, the 2 that they share, and then the m of this one, and then the m plus 4 of this one. So that is my least common denominator. So my next question is, what, if any, part of the common denominator does each fraction need? So when I look at this, it has the 2 and it has the m plus 4, so what it's missing is the m. So the fraction on the left is going to need the m, and remember, what I do to the denominator, I also have to do to the numerator. Alright, and then when I look at the second fraction, what, if any, is it missing? So it has the 2 and it has the m, so it's just missing the m plus 4. So I'm going to multiply by m plus 4, and what I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. Alright, so I'm going to simplify this up because it's kind of a hot mess. So I'm going to rewrite it in a simplified form. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply 3m times m, and that gives me 3m squared. And then my denominator is 2m, m plus 4. Alright, and then I'm adding, and I'm going to simplify this over here. Well, if you notice, it's m minus 2 times m plus 4, so I'm going to have to distribute. So I'm going to have to do m times m, which is m squared. I'm going to have to do m times 4, which is plus 4m. And then I'm going to have to do negative 2 times m, which is minus 2m. And negative 2 times 4, which is minus 8. And that's all over my common denominator. All right, and I'm going to simplify this numerator a little bit further because I do have a common, I can simplify it. So it's really going to be, I'm just going to rewrite 3m squared over the common denominator plus, and this becomes m squared plus 2m because 4m minus 2m is 2m over 8, and then the common denominator. Alright, so I've simplified it up. So my next question is, am I adding or am I subtracting? Well, I'm adding. When I'm adding, it's nice and easy because I won't have to distribute that negative like when I'm subtracting. So I can just, now that I have that common denominator, I can combine my like terms. So it's going to be 3m squared plus m squared. So that becomes 4m squared. And then I've got plus 2m minus 8. And my common denominator still comes down. And so then my last thing is, can I factor the numerator? So when I look at this, I'm not necessarily done. When I look at this, I see that they're all even numbers. So I can take out a 2. So I'm going to factor that numerator. And I'm just going to do it above it. I'm going to take out a 2, and I'm left with 2m squared plus m minus 8. And when I look at that, I think about, can I factor that even further? So if I were to multiply, it'd be a times c, which is negative 16. So are there any factors of negative 16 that give me 1? And there aren't. So I can't factor this any further. If I could, I would keep going. But I did take out a 2. And is there anything that can cancel? Well, I see there's a 2 here and a 2 here, and so those cancel. So my final answer is 2m squared plus m minus 8 all over m plus 4. So that is my simplified answer. It's kind of a long process. It's a little tedious, but you've got to really pay attention to your details. The biggest mistake I see is if this is a minus sign, students often forget to distribute it all the way through. So let's do some more examples and see if we can get the hang of this. So before we move on, I do want you to, on your paper, I want you to write down if you have any questions so that tomorrow when you come to class, you can ask me those questions. So look over this process and let me know if there's any numbers or places where I did something that you don't understand, and go ahead and either highlight that or write a question. All right, so example 2 has me adding 5 over x plus 3 plus 3 over x minus 2. So can I factor the denominators? If you notice, this is x plus 3, that's as simple as it goes, and x minus 2, that's as simple as it goes. So I cannot factor anything. So my next question is, what would my common denominator be? So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure out what the common denominator would be. So since there's nothing that they share, the common denominator is just going to be x plus 3 and x minus 2. So those two together is going to be the common denominator. So then I need to figure out, okay, what, if any, part of the common denominator does each fraction need? So when I look at this fraction right here has the x plus 3. So it's got this part, so it needs the x minus 2. So what I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. And I just wrote that one over here just for the sake of room. All right, and then when I look at the second fraction, I see it has the x minus 2, so it's just missing the x plus 3. So it's going to get the x plus 3. All right, and now I am going to simplify. So I'm just going to clean up the numerator and clean up the denominator. So my first fraction is going to have x plus 3, x minus 2 as the denominator. And when I look at this 5 times x minus 2, I'm just going to distribute that 5. All right, and then I'm going to clean up the second fraction. It's still going to have the x plus 3, x minus 2 denominator. But I'm going to distribute that 3, and it's going to become 3x plus 9. All right, so the next question is, am I adding or subtracting? I'm adding, so that's nice and easy. And so what is my simplified numerator? So I'm going to actually put everything together. So you can either write it out in steps and then combine, or you can combine from here. It doesn't matter. If you're a person who tends to lose details, I would write it out. So I would go 5x minus 10 plus 3x plus 9. You can even put it in parentheses if you're a person that loses details, so that you don't forget to, if this were subtraction, to distribute that negative. So whatever works for you, you've got to figure it out. I'm still going to have my x plus 3, x minus 2 denominator. Now some people can skip that step and just go straight to this one, where they can just up here combine 5x and 3x, which is the same as what you'd be doing down here. I get 8x, and then negative 10 plus 9 is minus 1. And so when I look at this, can I factor the numerator any further? 8x minus 1 is as simple as it gets, so this is my final answer. All right, so take a minute and look over where I got these different numbers and write any questions down that you might need to ask me tomorrow. All right, we're going to make it a little bit more complicated. So if you notice, this is a trinomial and this is a trinomial, and we're subtracting. So we've got a lot happening. So we're still going to follow that same process. Can I factor the denominators? So when I look at this, x squared plus 15x plus 56, because a is 1, I can just go straight to that 56. What are the factors of 56 that add to be 15? And I know that 8 and 7 make 56. And 8 plus 7 is 15. So x plus 7, x plus 8 is actually that factored denominator. So now let's look over to my other one. And so because a is 1, what are the factors of 42 that add to be 13? Well, that's easy. X plus 6 and x plus 7. All right. So what would my common denominator be? So when I look at these two denominators, I notice that they both have an x plus 7. So I am going to have x plus 7 in it. However, this one has an x plus 8 and this one has an x plus 6. So it's going to be the combination of all of those. So it's going to be the x plus 7 that they share, but then the x plus 8 of the first fraction and the x plus 6 of the second fraction. So my least common denominator is going to be those three binomials. So what does the first fraction need that it doesn't have? So when I look at the first fraction, it has the x plus 7, it has the x plus 8, so it needs that x plus 6. So when I multiply the denominator by, I have to multiply the numerator by. All right, and then my second fraction, it has the x plus 6 and the x plus 7, so it's just missing that x plus 8. And I'm going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by that. All right, so I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. So I'm going to have x plus 7, x plus 8, x plus 6 as my denominator, and my other fraction is going to have the same. All right, so now I am just going to distribute this x. So I'm going to have x squared plus 6x. And then over here, I'm going to clean up the 7, and I'm going to distribute that. So I'm going to have 7x plus 56. All right, so now I am ready to add or subtract. Well, I notice I'm subtracting. So some people may want to go ahead and turn this into a plus sign and then these into the opposites. Because if I subtract a positive 7, I'm actually subtracting 7. And if I subtract a positive 56, I'm actually going to become negative 56. So what I did is I simply distributed that negative to each of those terms so I don't lose anything in the long run. So for some people, that may make sense. If that doesn't, then just take it a step at a time and subtract those pieces. So now that I've simplified my numerators, I'm going to start putting it all together. So my common denominator, and so I'm going to have x squared, and there's nothing over here that I can combine x squared with, so it's just going to stay x squared. And then over here I have a 6x, and I had a minus a 7x, or I turned that into a plus sign and made this a negative 7x. So 6x minus 7x becomes minus x, because 6 minus 7 is negative 1. And then I don't have any constant, so it's just going to be minus 56 on the end. All right, so that's my simplified numerator. Can I factor the numerator? So when I look at this, it looks a little suspicious. So the x is 1, so I just look at this. What are the factors of 56 that subtract to be negative 1? Ooh, I can factor that. And I know that that is actually going to be x minus 8, x plus 7. So then my last question is, my second to last question, can I cancel anything with the denominator? Well, if you notice that I have an x minus 8 and an x plus 8, so those can't cancel, but I do have two x plus 7s. So those will cancel, and my final answer will be x minus 8 over, and what's left is x plus 8, x plus 6. So that is my final answer. So go ahead and pause the video and write down any questions about anything that I got that you might have for me. Alright, so for this one, I'd like you to pause the video and I'd like you to try to get as far as you can, and then I will come back on and you can check your answer. Alright, so when I solved this one out, I ended up with negative 11 over 15 times 2x plus 3. So if you got that, you can go ahead and move on to the next example. If you didn't, I'll explain how I got that now. Alright, so first of all, I factored my numerator, or my denominators, and I ended up with 5 times 2x plus 3 and 6 times 2x plus 3. So what I noticed is they both have a 2x plus 3, so that's part of my common denominator. This one has a 5 and this one has a 6. So I have 5 times 6 times 2x plus 3 is what I need for my common denominator. So when I look at this first fraction, it's just missing the 6. So what I multiply by the bottom, I have to multiply by the top. And when I look at this second fraction, it's missing the 5. So what I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So when I simplify my numerator, I end up with 18. And over here, I have minus 40, and then that common denominator. So I went ahead and put that together, and I did 18 minus 40, and I got negative 22 over 30 times 2x plus 3. And when I asked myself, can I simplify anything, I noticed that 2 can go into both of these. And so 2 goes into negative 22, negative 11 times, and 2 goes into 30, 15 times, and that's how I got my answer. So if you have any questions about this, go ahead and pause the video and write those down. Alright, again for this one, pause the video, go as far as you can, and see if you get the right answer. Alright, so when I solved it out, I ended up getting 3x minus 1 over x plus 3 squared, or you might just have it listed out, x plus 3, and then x plus 1. So if you got that, go ahead and move on. If you didn't, I'll explain what I did now. So first of all, I factored my denominators, and I ended up with x plus 3 times x plus 3. And then x plus 3 times x plus 1. So when I look at it, I notice that they both had an x plus 3. So that one is here. This one has an extra x plus 3, and this one has an extra x plus 1. So my common denominator is the combination of those, including the one that they share. So that's my common denominator. When I look at this, it has the x plus 3, so it's just missing the x plus 1. So I should have put it here. That's what I multiplied the top and the bottom by, and this one was missing an x plus 3, and I multiplied the top and the bottom by that. Alright, so when I went over, I went ahead and simplified the numerator, so I did 5x plus 5, and then this was minus, so I turned it into a plus and put the minus here and ended up distributing a negative 2, so it became negative 2x minus 6. And then I had my common denominator, and I just put the x plus 3's together just because I was running out of room. So I just said x plus 3 squared times x plus 1. They mean the same thing. So then I combined my like terms, 5x plus negative 2x is 3x, and 5 minus 6 is negative 1, and that's my final answer. So if there's any part of this that you don't understand, pause the video and write some questions to ask me about tomorrow. All right, now we've got 3 fractions. Same process. Still going to find a common denominator for all 3, and I'm going to make each of those have that common denominator. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find that common denominator or if you can solve it out, and I'll explain it in a minute. So for this one, once I've factored this one, this is already factored, as simple as they can go, I notice that my LCD is x times x plus 5. Because this has an x plus 5, and so does this. This has an x, and so does this. So this actually has both pieces of my common denominator. So that is my common denominator. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can finish the problem out. All right, so when I solved this one out, I got 4x minus 1 over x plus 5. So like we said, if you got that, go ahead and move on. If you didn't, I'll explain it now. So like we said, my least common denominator is going to be x times x plus 5. So this fraction is just missing the x. This fraction is missing the x plus 5, and this one's good. It has both parts. So that's why it just came out and became its same self. So here I needed to distribute an x to both parts, so that became 4x squared plus x. Here I had a minus sign, and so I turned it into a plus sign and made that negative. So I ended up distributing a negative 2, so negative 2x, and negative 2 times 5, which is negative 10. And then they all have that same common denominator. So now that they have that common denominator, I moved it down here, and I just combined my like terms. So 4x squared does not have a like term, so it just came down. And here I had x minus 2x, which is negative x. And then I had negative 10 plus 10, so those just canceled. And so I ended up with 4x squared minus x over x times x plus 5. And then I always want to ask myself, can I factor? And I noticed that these both have a GCF of an x. So I took an x out, and when I took an x out, this became 4x, and this became negative 1. And those x's canceled, and so I ended up with just 4x minus 1 over x plus 5. So go ahead and pause the video and write down any questions that you might have about this or any numbers or places that I got the numbers from. All right, again, I'd like you to pause the video, try this problem, see as far as you can go. All right, so when I solved this one out, I ended up with x plus 1 over x minus 3. So if you got that, you can move on. If you didn't, then I'll explain it now. All right, so when I looked up here, I factored x squared minus 7x plus 12, and I got x minus 3, x minus 4. And when I look at these two denominators, the common denominator is going to be that x minus 3, x minus 4. So when I look at this fraction, it's just missing the x minus 3, and what I do to the numerator, I have to do the denominator. I'm sorry, the other way around. So then I just cleaned up my numerator. So I distributed the x and distributed the negative 3, and I ended up with x times x is x squared, x times 1 is 1x, negative 3 times x is negative 3x, and negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. And then this fraction didn't need anything, so I just brought it over here, so minus the x plus 1 over the common denominator. So then I simplified my numerator here, x squared, and I did 1x minus 3x became negative 2x minus 3. And then I did turn this minus sign into a plus sign, and then I distributed that negative to both of those. So it became negative 1x minus 1 and my common denominator. So now that they have a common denominator and the numerators are both simplified, I went ahead and combined my like terms. So x squared doesn't combine with anything over here. Negative 2x can combine with negative x, and that becomes negative 3x. And negative 3 combines with negative 1 and became negative 4. Now before I go ahead and finish, I always want to see if I can factor this. So what are the factors of 4 that subtract to be 3? Well, negative 4 and positive 1. And that negative 4 happened to cancel with part of my common denominator, which left me with just x plus 1 over x minus 3. So go ahead and pause the video and write down any questions about where I got any numbers. All right, this is our last example. Go ahead and pause the video and see how far you can get. All right, for my final answer, I ended up with 2x minus 5 over x minus 3 times x minus 2. If you got that, you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. If you didn't, I'll explain it now. All right, so when I look at this, I saw this was a difference of squares, so it was x plus 3, x minus 3, and the factors, because a was 1, the factors of negative 6, that give me 1, and I got plus 3 and minus 2. So when I look at these two sets of factors, they both share an x plus 3, so that's part of my least common denominator. This one has an x minus 3, and this one has an x minus 2. So this is my common denominator. So when I look at this, it's missing the x minus 2, so x minus 2, x minus 2. This one's missing the x minus 3, so x minus 3, x minus 3. And then I simplified my numerators. So 2x times x became 2x squared. 2x times negative 4 became negative 4x. And then I distributed that 5. And because this is a plus sign, I went ahead and just kept it positive. So 5x minus 15. And then because they have that common denominator, I can now combine like terms. So 2x squared, and then negative 4x and positive 5x became a positive 1x, and then the negative 15 came on the end. And I noticed that this could be factored. Now, you may need to go through the process of factoring by grouping. I'm going to trust that you know how to do that. So we multiply 2 times negative 15, and we get negative 30. So the factors of negative 30, they give me 1. Once I factor that, I end up with 2x minus 5 and x plus 3. And when I look at that, the x plus 3 and the x plus 3 can cancel. And so I'm left with the 2x minus 5 and then the x minus 3, x minus 2 on the bottom. So go ahead and if you have any questions, pause the video and write down or highlight anywhere that I lost you, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. All right, as part of your reflection, I do want you to do this part. So what's the summary? What did we talk about today? What are the steps? What do you need to remember? These are things that are going to go into your study guide that you're going to fill out at the end of class tomorrow. And then what are 3 errors you think students tend to make when adding or subtracting those rational expressions? So I pointed out a couple of things in the video, so go ahead and write down what are 3 errors you think students tend to make. And then are there any questions that you have? I want you to kind of rate yourself. Where do you feel you are with this? So when you come in tomorrow, are you ready to just practice it? Do you need to talk about it? Or are you completely lost? So that's kind of what I want here. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow.